You think you understand why the universe has a speed limit? You don't. You assume it exists because something must be fastest, because nature needs a maximum, because reality would fall apart without restraint. That assumption feels reasonable. It feels inevitable. And it is wrong. The universe did not impose a speed limit to preserve order. It reveals one because order emerges from deeper constraints that do not care what feels reasonable to you. Your confidence comes from habit. You are accustomed to limits. Machines overheat, bodies tire, signals degrade. You extend this logic outward and imagine the universe behaves the same way, as if it were an engineered system with tolerances. But the universe does not fail when pushed. It does not strain. It does not resist. It simply remains consistent. The speed limit is not a ceiling imposed on motion. It is a consequence of how reality is structured. Discomfort begins when you realize the limit is not about speed at all. Nothing slows down as it approaches it. No invisible resistance appears. No cosmic friction intervenes. Instead, something more unsettling occurs. Space and time themselves change their behavior. Distances contract. Durations stretch. What you thought were stable backgrounds begin to respond. This is not a correction applied to moving objects. It is a redefinition of what motion means. At this point, intuition attempts a rescue. You imagine the limit as the speed of light, something associated with photons, something physical that travels. You think the universe has chosen light as the fastest thing and built everything else beneath it. This feels explanatory. It is not. Light is not fast because it is light. Light behaves the way it does because it has no mass, and massless entities do not move through time the way you do. This is where contradiction becomes unavoidable. If the speed limit was simply about light, then adding energy should eventually push massive objects beyond it. Yet the opposite occurs. The more energy you add, the harder it becomes to increase speed. Energy stops producing motion and begins producing inertia. The universe does not reward effort with progress. It redirects it into resistance. Not because it wants to stop you, but because motion and time are not independent variables. The deeper mechanism reveals itself quietly. The speed limit is not a restriction on objects. It is a restriction on causality. It defines how quickly influence can propagate, not how fast something moves through space, but how fast one event can affect another. Beyond that limit, cause and effect lose coherence. Sequence collapses. The distinction between before and after becomes frame-dependent. Reality does not tolerate this instability. This is why the limit is universal. Not because everything is forced to obey it, but because anything that violates it would destroy the structure that allows events to be ordered at all. Without a maximum speed for information, simultaneity could not be defined even locally. The universe would fragment into contradictions. The limit is not enforced by force, it is enforced by consistency. This reframes the question entirely. The universe does not ask how fast things can go. It asks whether cause can precede effect. The moment influence outruns the structure that orders events, reality stops being describable. Not mysterious, not unknown, simply incoherent. The speed limit is where description ends, not where motion fails. Once this is seen, another unsettling realization follows. For anything that moves at this limit, time does not pass, not slowly, not differently, not at all. From its perspective, if such a perspective can even be said to exist, emission and absorption are the same event. No duration separates them. This is not a metaphor. It is a direct consequence of the structure you inhabit. You experience time because you move through it. Light does not. And because it does not, it occupies a boundary between events rather than a path through them. The speed limit is the speed at which time vanishes. It is not fast. It is timeless. This is the point where comfort disappears entirely. The universe did not choose a maximum speed to prevent chaos. Chaos is permitted. It chose a structure in which only certain relationships can exist. The limit is not negotiable because it is not imposed. It is revealed. Remove it, and you remove the possibility of sequence, memory, and explanation itself. The unavoidable conclusion forms without drama. The speed limit exists because without it, the universe could not sustain cause and effect. It is not a feature added to reality. It is a consequence of reality being consistent with itself. Your intuition fails because it expects limits to behave like barriers. This one behaves like a definition. After understanding this, what part of your belief about speed still feels compatible with a universe that prioritizes consistency over intuition? The initial shock settles into a fragile clarity, and with it a new assumption quietly forms. You begin to think the speed limit is now understood because it has been reframed as a boundary of causality rather than motion. That feels satisfying. It feels final. But it is still incomplete. The universe has not yet finished dismantling your intuition. What remains is the most persistent error, the belief that limits exist where reality runs out of capacity. You still imagine the speed limit as something the universe approaches from below, as if there were a gradual transition from the familiar to the forbidden. But the structure does not behave that way. There is no threshold where things nearly break. There is only a boundary where the rules that define nearly stop applying. This is not a quantitative limit, it is a qualitative one. On one side, time orders events. On the other, time no longer functions as an ordering principle at all. Discomfort deepens when you confront what this means for motion itself. In everyday experience, speed is relative. You can always describe motion as faster or slower depending on the observer. Yet this single speed refuses to behave that way. Every observer, regardless of their own motion, agrees on it, not approximately, exactly. This is not an accident, it is a structural demand. If different observers disagreed about the maximum speed of causality, then the sequence of events would depend on who was watching. Reality would fracture into incompatible histories. This contradiction exposes something subtle and unsettling. The universe is not designed to preserve objects. It is designed to preserve relationships. The speed limit protects the invariance of cause and effect across perspectives. Objects can stretch, compress, gain energy, or lose mass. Time can dilate. Space can contract. But the ordering of influence must remain intact. The limit exists to preserve agreement, not comfort. At this point, intuition attempts another retreat. You may think the limit applies only to signals, not to reality itself. Perhaps information is restricted, but existence is not. Yet information is not an optional layer placed on top of reality. It is how reality connects. An event that cannot influence anything else is indistinguishable from one that does not exist. The speed limit governs existence insofar as existence implies interaction. The deeper mechanism becomes clearer here. The universe is not a collection of independent objects moving through a neutral background. It is a network of events constrained by how they can relate. The speed limit defines the geometry of that network. It determines which events can be connected and which cannot. Remove it, and geometry loses meaning. Distance collapses. Separation becomes undefined. Without a limit, every event would be adjacent to every other. Structure would vanish. This realization reverses another deeply held belief. You assume limits reduce possibility. In this case, the limit creates it. Only because influence is finite can there be locality. Only because locality exists can systems remain distinct. Only because systems remain distinct can complexity arise. The speed limit is not an obstacle to richness. It is the condition that allows richness to exist at all. The universe does not restrict speed to slow things down. It restricts speed to prevent everything from happening at once. A reality where influence is instantaneous is not a more powerful universe. It is a meaningless one. In such a universe, there is no sequence, no separation, no identity. Everything collapses into a single, undifferentiated state. The limit prevents this collapse not by force, but by definition. Once this is understood, another uncomfortable implication surfaces. You are not delayed by the speed limit. You are defined by it. Your body, your thoughts, your memories, and your continuity all rely on finite propagation. If signals within you were instantaneous, you would not be a system. You would be a contradiction. The limit that frustrates intuition is the same one that allows you to exist as something extended rather than collapsed. The unavoidable conclusion draws closer. The speed limit is not something you might someday overcome. Overcoming it would not produce faster travel or greater reach. It would erase the structure that makes travel and reach meaningful. There is nothing beyond it in the way intuition imagines, because beyond it, the concepts of before, after, and elsewhere lose coherence. If this limit defines not how fast things move, but how reality maintains distinction, then what exactly do you think would remain if that distinction were removed? By now, the remaining resistance is no longer technical, it is conceptual. You may accept that the speed limit preserves causality, that it protects structure, that it defines how events relate rather than how objects move. Yet a deeper expectation persists, that boundaries like this must originate from something more fundamental beneath them, that there must be a deeper layer where the limit itself is explained away. This expectation is familiar. It is how intuition survives repeated collapse. It assumes there is always a lower floor. The universe does not guarantee one. At this depth, the speed limit stops behaving like a rule and starts behaving like a definition. It does not arise from matter, energy, or motion. It arises from the way space and time are joined. Once space-time is taken as a single structure rather than two independent arenas, the limit is no longer optional. It is the conversion rate between space and time themselves. Not a measured quantity imposed afterward, but a relationship without which the structure cannot exist coherently. This reframes a mistake that intuition makes repeatedly. You imagine space as something things move through, and time as something things move along. You then imagine speed as the ratio between the two. But when space and time are inseparable, speed is no longer merely motion, it becomes geometry. Changing speed means changing how space and time are experienced relative to one another. Push far enough and one of them collapses entirely. This is why massive objects cannot reach the limit. It is not because they are heavy or slow or inefficient. It is because they are anchored in time. To reach the limit would require them to abandon temporal extension altogether. That is not a matter of energy. It is a matter of existence. An object that reaches the speed limit ceases to experience duration. It does not arrive faster. It arrives without arriving. Discomfort intensifies here because the implication feels abstract, almost evasive, yet it is precise. Motion at the limit does not shorten a journey. It eliminates the concept of a journey. The beginning and end collapse into a single event. This is not an exaggeration. It is the direct consequence of how space-time preserves consistency. What intuition interprets as extreme speed is, at the boundary, a disappearance of temporal separation. At this point, contradiction becomes complete. You began with the belief that speed is about getting somewhere more quickly. You now face a limit where speed destroys the very framework that allows somewhere and quickly to exist. The universe does not prevent this outcome by resisting it. It prevents it by making it meaningless. The deeper mechanism reveals why this limit appears everywhere, unchanged, immune to context. It is not a property of particles, it is a property of space-time itself. Particles adapt to it, fields obey it, observers measure within it, but none of them generate it. It is not derived from dynamics, it is the stage on which dynamics can occur at all. This is why attempts to imagine surpassing it always collapse into paradox. Faster-than-limit influence does not merely reorder events, it erases the possibility of order. It allows effects to precede causes in some frames while reversing them in others. This is not exotic, it is destructive. The universe does not permit contradictions to propagate. It removes the conditions under which they could arise. Once this is understood, the speed limit stops feeling restrictive and starts feeling absolute in a different sense. It is not the edge of possibility. It is the edge of intelligibility. Beyond it, statements lose meaning. Not because knowledge is lacking, but because the concepts themselves no longer apply. Asking what happens beyond the limit is like asking what shape a contradiction has. This is why the limit does not invite speculation. It terminates it. The universe does not offer alternative modes of existence where causality survives without structure. It does not hide faster realms behind the curtain. It closes the curtain because nothing coherent can stand there. The unavoidable conclusion sharpens now. The speed limit exists because reality must choose between consistency and chaos. It chooses consistency not as a preference, but as a condition for anything to exist at all. You do not observe the limit because it is remarkable. You observe it because without it, there would be nothing to observe. If this boundary defines the point at which description itself fails, then what does it mean to keep imagining beyond it, as if reality were obliged to continue in a form you recognize? What remains now is not confusion, but exposure. The final assumption still standing is the most subtle one, that the universe must, at some level, explain itself in terms that align with human expectation. That even if limits exist, they must ultimately resolve into something comprehensible, something that reassures you that reality is continuous with the way it appears from within. This assumption survives longer than the others because it rarely announces itself. It hides inside the demand for explanation itself. The universe does not satisfy that demand. At the boundary defined by the speed limit, explanation reaches its natural end. Not because inquiry has failed, but because the structure being examined has no deeper layer that preserves the same concepts. Space and time are not built on top of something slower or faster. They are the framework within which speed has meaning at all. Once that framework is fully specified, nothing remains underneath it that can restore intuition. This is why attempts to imagine exceeding the limit always revert to fantasy rather than physics. They rely on smuggling familiar ideas into a domain where those ideas no longer function. Movement without duration, influence without order, connection without locality. These are not bold extensions of understanding. They are contradictions disguised as imagination. The universe does not forbid them, it renders them incoherent. At this depth, even the word limit becomes misleading. A limit suggests approach, tension, resistance. None of that applies here. The speed associated with causality is not something reality strains against. It is the condition that allows reality to be articulated at all. There is no pressure at the boundary because nothing is trying to cross it. Crossing would require the universe to abandon the consistency that defines it. This resolves the last remaining discomfort. You are not confined by the speed limit. You are constituted by it. Every stable structure, every delayed interaction, every extended system exists only because influence takes time. The separation between here and there, now and then, self and other, depends on finite propagation. Without it, distinction collapses. With it, structure emerges. The universe did not choose a speed limit to prevent excess. It reflects a universe where excess has no meaning. There is no faster mode waiting to be unlocked, no deeper layer where influence outruns order. The idea of beyond survives only as a projection of intuition, not as a feature of reality. Once this is accepted, the collapse of intuition is complete. Speed is not a measure of ambition. It is a measure of how reality maintains coherence. The maximum is not impressive. It is necessary. Remove it, and explanation itself dissolves. Not because the universe becomes mysterious, but because it becomes undefined. This is why the answer feels unsettling rather than enlightening. It does not expand possibility. It clarifies limits. It shows that the universe is not obligated to accommodate the way you imagine extension, progress, or transcendence. It accommodates only what remains internally consistent. The unavoidable conclusion stands without emphasis. The universe has a speed limit because without it, there would be no universe to describe. Not a slower one, not a different one, none at all. After recognizing this, which belief about possibility feels hardest to abandon? That reality could go faster, or that it was never required to go further in the first place? If you've made it this far, you've probably realized that the idea of going faster was never about speed. It was about limits, about the exact point where reality ceases to make sense. Most people spend their entire lives believing that the universe works like an infinite road, when in fact it works like a structure that only exists because certain limits cannot be surpassed. If this video made you rethink what possibility really means, write the phrase in the comments, "The limit does not impede reality, it sustains it." And if you want to continue exploring ideas that challenge the obvious, dismantle common intuitions, and show how the universe really works, subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is an invitation to abandon comfortable certainties and face the real structure of existence.